Okay. Wait, there's some coming. There's people still rapidly trying to fill this.
Too late to miss the deadline.
No.
So Corina is going to read out the answers to the quiz.
And the first question was, which corporation had its most revenue and profit in 2012? The answer was
Hang on, there's still coming in.
Royal Dutch Shell.
Royal Dutch Shell. Okay. Answer to the first question. Which one's the...
Billy's going to give this person his last chance.
So what was the question?
The question was, which corporation made the biggest revenue and profit in 2012?
So BP and Walmart stores were in the top 4, and Glencore International was number 16.
And the winner was Royal Dutch Shell.
Hey, let's hear it from
Their shareholders were the winners, isn't it?
The second question, the world's first stock issuing multinational corporation trading shares on the financial stock exchange was... The right answer is Dutch East India Company.
That's crowded.
The fourth question was, can the World Trade Organization legally overrule national governments? Answer, yes.
Whoa, okay.
In 2009, what proportion of the 150 largest economic entities were corporations? What proportion was? And the correct answer was 59%.
Ouch. I didn't realize it was that many. I didn't realize it was that many.
David Cameron could not say what the Magna Carta meant in everyday English. What does it mean? The Great Charter. Some people said not a lot. I don't think that was the answer intended. Okay, suffragettes fought for votes for women. When did all women finally get the vote in Britain? All women, that is. And the answer was 1928. Somebody's written 2030.
That's the time.
Actually got a late winner. One late entrance is winning, and it is Michael Gold.
Where's Michael Gold?
He picked it mainly because he knew the suffragettes answer.
He's the man, that's a good one. But we should say, but if he hadn't put in his late one, it would have been a tie between 5 people who all got 3 answers right. We had them all in a hat ready to pull out.
Congratulations that nobody, apart from that one last guy, got 50% or above. And congratulations definitely to the people who designed the quiz and numbered it wrong.
Well, mathematics is awesome.
Numbers are important.
Didn't we know more about democracy and economics?
Okay, goes 1 to 3.
Surprise.
Damn it.
The prize is a copy of...
Not Becca's book because it's too expensive. But this wonderful little book, which is a lot of the arguments that Becky's put forward are in this book. Little book. And a World Twin is kindly donating it to the winner, Michael.
And there's a free drink at the bar as well.
A free drink at the bar as well.
Are you coming up to your prize?
By the way, this is an advert for teaching history by numbers.
Yes, if you could actually.
So now it's time to ask Becky questions about the talk that she gave or make comments. So would anybody like to kick it off? Dave?
Yeah, I agree with about 80% of what you've said, but that would be very interesting. So, okay, you've critiqued capitalism. Number one, what is the alternative? And kind of centralised, state-controlled economic production ain't got any better a record than capitalism. Secondly, you sort of diss the corporation, but I mean you can have a whole load of forms of corporation, and the predominant form that we've got at the moment, which is the PLC, with people saying, you maximise your quarterly profits, otherwise the shareholders will sort of fire the board and sort of let somebody. That clearly is mussing things up. But you can have a wide variety of corporations. I mean, just to advertise Colin Mayo's book, I mean, he even includes the sort of co-ops and that sort of thing in corporations. So, I mean, do you think we just need to move to a wider ecology of economic forms? And if you don't agree with me there, what are you going to do?
Well, I certainly don't agree with him.
You never do, Mike, but that's why we have...
Do you want to
For the answer about alternatives, I personally don't think it's my place to have a world plan and say exactly how we should organise things. I think we should go with first principles about how we make decisions. Sorry, we should go with first principles about how we make decisions and go from there, and sort of try and be as inclusive as possible so that all needs, wants, and sort of opinions are taken into account. I certainly wouldn't advocate for a centralised command economy. That and I just think it should be about having the principles in place for inclusion of political opinions and sort of political freedoms of expression and things. So that, I mean, I suppose.
So democracy and corporations have to coexist.
Well, I haven't said anything about corporations in that. And I agree that there are several forms of corporations. In fact, where I work, Corporate Watch is a not-for-profit company. So I reckon. Well, I was using in the talk the corporation as a commercial enterprise, as in one which did prioritise profit and which was legally bound to prioritise people's other concerns. But of course, that isn't all of what a corporation is, and in fact the word corporate just means a collection, doesn't it? And what's wrong with getting together and doing things? I certainly don't oppose that. So I think you're right about a different way of doing things. It's just profit and the sort of the way that everything is subjugated to that need to create profit is the problem.
Can I ask you, you seem to use company and corporation as interchangeable words. I mean, are you? Because I've got in my head that a corporation is different from a company. I'm not sure I could define the difference, but if you say any profit-making enterprise which has a form of governance as a company, then you're saying that what's actually destroying the world is corner shops. Well, I don't think that's the case. Yeah, I mean, you take my point. Corner shops are mostly companies. They'll be small companies. But in my head, I've got corporation. I've got a different thing. It involves global. It involves concentration of power. It involves ideas about being able to influence governments in your own right. You don't have to form an alliance with anybody else. You're completely. I mean, those sorts of ideas. But I mean, is that not the way you're presenting the issue?
Well, I was just going to say, I think that a big division within capitalism is between capital, which is personally tied to an individual, like the corner shop, whereas a person, an individual. I mean, in law, if you run a corner shop and you die, then that's the business ended. In the corporate form, of course, the corporate form is the collective body, like a company, that carries on for 100 years. So it becomes independent of the individual. It's kind of slightly socialised, if you like, form of capital, because it doesn't belong to it's not tied to an individual as such. It's tied to a collective of people.
Well, then maybe that's a bad example. Let's crank it up one to small companies, small limited companies. Is there a difference between a small limited company and Circa? Are we talking? Is that? I'm trying to get the frame of the debate here.
Well, the corporation is quoted on a stock exchange, and a company is a private company. That would be a simple differentiation.
If you're a sole owner, there's a
Can we
big
just,
difference.
sorry, there was a young woman at the back who wanted to make a point as well.
I'd like to make some points, but not at this stage.
Okay, fine. Michael?
I think there's a lot of confusion in talking about democracy and corporations, and I think what's becoming evident is that what we now call neoliberalism is actually a sort of fascism light. And what we actually have is, and you can see the lineage through from Nazi Germany through apartheid South Africa back to Britain, is that in Nazi Germany you had a totalitarian system. But unlike Eastern Europe, it was not everything run by the state. The state contracted the companies to do the work. And the state said to the companies, you keep your noses clean, don't ask any questions, we'll give you the monopoly, not competition, not capitalism, we'll give you a monopoly. In fact, Mussolini is quoted as saying that fascism is really corporatism. It's the fusion of the state and the corporate entities. And so what you got was the companies, Volkswagen, Mercedes for some of them, IG Farben that produced the gas for the concentration camps was broken up after the war into Bayer, and I can't remember offhand who the other one, DAFX, the tape people. In South Africa, you had exactly the same thing. You got, instead of getting the slave labour from the concentration camp, and by the way, anybody that wears Hugo Boss, he made his money with slave labour, making uniforms for the Wehrmacht and the Gestapo, and served 3 years as a war criminal. The nice fashion label, isn't it? In South Africa, the state said that South African breweries would have a monopoly for brewing. Nice cheap labour, the mines had cheap labour. Today, SA Miller Lite, the second largest brewer in the world, is of course South African breweries. And so this is how they made their money. And the state gives the contracts. And when you look at what's happening in Britain today with the privatisation, the contracting out, we're doing exactly the same thing. 0 hours contract, we're bringing back casual labour. People have, Sainsbury's say they don't do 0 hours contract, you have a minimum of 4 hours a week. What fucking good is 4 hours a week for somebody to live on? And so what we're actually doing is neoliberalism has nothing to do with capitalism. This is a totalitarian system. And if you link in the loss of freedoms, that we have less freedom today than we had 100 years ago in terms of strikes, industrial actions, protesting, etc., we can see what is happening. If anybody's read Jack London, The Iron Heel, he was forecasting this would happen over 100 years ago. And I'm going to stop there because if you actually want to read the whole thing, it is on the Occupy website as neoliberalism or fascism light. It's also on my own website, which is radicalsoapbox.com. And I really think to discuss how you can make corporations more democratic is a bit like tinkering with the deck chairs on the Titanic. It really is a non-starter. We need to actually get rid of the system. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I don't think Becky was suggesting we could make corporations more democratic. I don't think she was suggesting that at all. She was saying we have a...
Sorry, I didn't hear it because I went to the Lucas Arms.
But she didn't say it there either. Anyway, sorry.
I was the only one there.
But she didn't say that. She could defend herself, but she was saying that the corporations, and I think we're talking about global corporations, the major corporations, the transnationals, 150 that were in the quiz here, they and their operations and the way they operate is incompatible with any notion of democracy, and that the liberal democratic system we have, the so-called liberal democratic system, is a facade, a cover for it. And that really, I think, then raises two questions. If we're going to transform corporate power into social corporate power, that can only be done, in my view, through a change in the political democratic system we have. The two have to go together. We cannot socialise the corporations and make them run in a not-for-profit way, which I think is what we should aim for, and use their resources and their know-how and technology for the benefit of humankind. This can only be achieved through a massive political change, and it isn't coming through the representative democratic system. I agree with you. I wouldn't say it was fascism light. We wouldn't be sitting here if it was. I think there'd be the SS would be outside the door, and they're not.
I said light.
Yeah, okay, they're not even outside the door in plain clothes. So let's not. It's getting.
It's a fair bet there's one of them sitting here at the meeting now.
Well, I'm sure maybe more than one.
They won't identify themselves, though, will they?
We need Tom.
But then, God, I lost my train of thought. We need to get beyond representative democracy. We need to get beyond that. That grew up with capitalism. I don't completely agree with you the way it sort of grew up with it, but it grew up and paralleled and developed and facilitates capitalism, and today facilitates global capitalism. That's what it does in every country. It's hollowed out. There is no democracy in that sense. And Peter Holborn, the right-wing Tory writer, a very sinister comment the other week when, after the budget, when they realised the deficit was 50% bigger than when they came in, said this representative democracy will not work for what we have to do. And he suggested it will have to go. And he wasn't proposing socialist revolution, by the way, he was proposing fascism, not lying, essentially. So there is a challenge, and in the Real Democracy Working Group, we've been promoting and developing a new agreement of the people, which raises a new constitutional settlement for transferring political power into the hands of the people as a step towards getting hold of corporate power and making that subordinate to a new political democratic system.
Dave, and then
Steve was trying to
oh, was Steve was like, so I could see. Okay.
Okay, I'm several squares behind you when you say we need to get rid of representative democracy.
I didn't say that. I said we need
That's
to transcend
what
it.
we
have to
beyond
transcend
representative
it.
democracy.
Let's not get rid of it.
Aha, okay, amplify it, find other ways of doing stuff and so on, but I'm still quite prepared to sort of vote for people to sort of...
Paraphrase Gandhi.
Let him speak.
Western democracy.
Don't worry, I can cope with Mike interrupting. I've had lots of practice, and it's a lot of practice from me.
Yeah, we've got to wait. So, Dave, do you want to carry on?
Okay, well, having sort of, raised that issue, let's get at Mike instead. Saying that sort of fascism is the same as neoliberalism, well, I mean, there's always, tremendously rich people will try and sort of, take money and power away from everybody else. I mean, neoliberalism was described by Lord Adair Turner, head of the FSA, as a kind of 50-year intellectual mistake. In some ways, it's on its way. On the other hand, in the economic crisis we've got, you will get people trying to push out 0 hours and that sort of thing too. And we've got to have more regulation of the right type. But fascism and neoliberalism, I mean, certainly the road to serfdom, they're posed as very, very different things. But corporate state neoliberalism ain't necessarily the same, but it does get down, I think, to details, and having this sort of plurality, this ecosystem, which isn't simply PLCs where they are legally bound to have the maximum return on equity every quarter, otherwise somebody else is going to take them over. So, for God's sake, go out and form your co-ops and your alternative forms of economic structure.
I think it's best to perhaps answer the question from before. I think it's best to think of capital taking many different forms, from the personalised form, like the sole trader, then through types of companies. And I would use the word company and corporation as just interchangeable. I think corporation is the American term for it, and company is the English term. So the East India Company is the world's first multinational corporation, in fact. But even if you think of companies, you've got private companies where you actually control who can be a member of it, and a public company where anybody can buy a share in the stock exchange. And when you've got a public company, there's not an absence of democracy there, because the shareholders in a public company get the right to vote. The only thing about that, of course, is that it's not one person, one vote, it's one share, one vote, which means if you've got 1,000 shares, you've got 1,000 votes. So it's a democracy on capital, not a democracy on people. But there's no reason I don't see why a company couldn't have a democracy based on people. That is to say, if you took away the ownership right and made it a publicly owned corporation, and then you said,
or even commonly owned.
Publicly or commonly owned organisation, and then you said that the people who worked in that organisation, directly involved in it, had that corporation on trust for society, and they would construct a democracy within that company to run it, to choose the management, to choose the objectives, and to have democratic assemblies inside that company to actually decide how the whole thing should be run and how it should be managed. And that would be a democratic, publicly owned corporation, like a cooperative in a way, except it would be publicly owned, not privately owned. And I think that would work as a model. So in a way, I think you can transform, and we should be about transforming the corporations we've got, but that takes about, we'll never do that whilst the state power keeps that whole thing away from us. So you can't do that as a political point without changing the political system, which is there to protect the corporate power and protect the laws that keep it in place. So you've got to have a democratic state, not just a democratic corporation.
Thanks, Steve. Okay, Michael?
Yeah, I just want to go back to the question, which was, are corporations and democracy compatible? I'm just wondering whether actually they are or can be compatible. I just want to put forward some sort of an idea where you've got, you said corporations like the engine. So if you've got an engine, and then capitalism itself is the sort of the system, that's the feeding into the system. You know, there's a difference then. Democracy is the sort of the relational quality of how people relate to each other and the relationships which create the whole system. Then where is sort of the disease and where is the symptom of the disease within that? And I'm just thinking of the film The Corporation, which talks a lot about, you know, if you look at them as having corporate personhood and they're people, then how, if you treat them as people and psychologically analyze them, what's their behavior like? You know, it says they're psychotic in their behavior. But then if people are psychotic, we don't kill them or get rid of them, we think of ways to heal them. What is it that's actually causing the problem? What is the issue? What's the symptom? What's the disease? And then in law, you know, we've got the profit motive, because, you know, everyone's got a duty to increase the profit for the shareholders. So that in itself is like the genetic code or what we have in people, which creates our behavior. So that's what's creating the behavior. So how do we change that? And in that way, there's for example, there's different organisations, social enterprises, but more than just social enterprises. There's a whole new paradigm which has been created around what corporations. How can you create corporations which put at their centre a different idea? So there's Mbku McCartney, who talks about the indigenous tribes of in America, where they had a sort of a natural law system. They would observe nature and say, what are the ways that nature organises itself, and how do we recreate those systems in our systems? And that he talks about the balance between male and female, and the children's fire, which is where the need for everyone to look after their children, or the generational quality, and putting the children's fire, he says, at the centre of all our institutions and corporations. The need to look after our children, that's down 7 generations, is a way that a number of companies are looking at. There's something called Holos, which is looking at trying to create a paradigm where that is put at the centre, you know, leadership, value-led leadership. And looking at the sort of whole system, when you've got, you know, the earth and her gifts, and then you've got our gifts, which are our relations towards each other, the way our social capital. And then you've got money as a sort of facilitative means between those. I mean, you could see money as just a facilitative means between the social capital that we have and the earth's gifts. And the way that we focus on the creation of money, you know, it exhausts our social capital, our relations towards each other. Whereas if we focused on just money as a facilitative means between the social capital and the earth's capital, her resources, her gifts, then money itself just becomes that facilitation. And it creates that sort of sense that, you know, what are we trying to move towards? You know, it's sort of an environmentalism as a form of democracy. And yeah, there's like Polly Higgins' work with Ecocide, and sort of something that I'm trying to develop myself with Polly is a people's process, which looks at sort of democracy and how, where can we engage in these issues? And like the planning system, for example, is one where you've got corporations involved. You've got democratic systems already in place on the sort of a local level. And you've also got an inquiry process where you can sort of like look at these issues and try to work them out, but also force corporations down different ways of acting. So to put it succinctly is that, you know, I don't think corporations are the problem. It's they're just a symptom. But if you change the core centre of what actually we're intending to achieve as people, you know, why are we here? What do we want to achieve towards each other? And put values at the centre, then the corporations will automatically sort of move towards that.
Sounds like you got a lot of support there.
Thank you.
Oh, I just want to say that
I thought Becca put forward a really good picture of the rise of corporate capitalism, and in a quite short space of time, and it's really important because it's important to see it as a system that came into being in a certain time of history, and it's not a permanent fixture in the history of humanity. It's part of a whole development, and parallel to the rise of these corporations is also, and separate, a process of people struggling for democratic rights, which is not identical. It's in, as like I said, it's in constant contradiction with the system of economic exploitation and the rule of minority over the majority. So there's, I mean, you stressed the fact there was a constant contradiction at the heart of this, and I think that's the really important thing we've got to see, and that how has that contradiction, what point has it come to now in history? In fact, I think you also pointed out the fact that it needs this democratic shell is a sign of its own weakness. It's not a sign of strength. And the fact that that democratic shell has become increasingly delegitimized, that they use it to conduct a war, or several wars in fact, and that's quite a new phenomenon, as you pointed out, that is tarnished it, it's denatured it as a genuine concept of democracy, and people know that, they see that. So that the point we reached now is that this shell of democracy is so hollow, it's very fragile, and it means that actually they're very, at their heart, they're very weak, because they're, as you also point out, they only, behind the democratic shell is the force, the brute force that you have to go out and work for a living, you have to live off, your labor, and you have to go and sell your labor to an employer. Even if you're self-employed, you're at the mercy of these corporations because they're huge and they dominate the market. So that there's this element of compulsion which is hidden behind the outer, this kind of democratic framework, and that's the problem they've got. And I think that's why it's come to the point where it can be and it must be changed in a truly fundamental way, and that we can have a vision of corporations that are democratically run and controlled and not run for profit, which is a contradiction because they are compelled to make a profit. But if that profit motive is taken away through a whole, revolutionary process, then you could conceive of totally different beneficial type of corporation. So that, that is a contradiction, because at the moment they're responsible for the horrors of all kinds of things, from Shell to all other Monsanto, the pharmaceutical, the agribusiness, responsible for the devastation of the planet, and more. But the irony is that, or the contradiction is that they could be something completely different, but that requires a political and social revolution, in my view.
Thanks. Okay, so Chris, and then some people over here. Victor?
I know I'm going to be kind of preaching to the converted already here, but because you are presumably already the converted, could I quickly just have a show of hands? Not of the people that have been down to Parliament on protests or as tourists or whatever, but how many people have actually gone in to the Houses of Parliament, into the Houses of Commons or the Lords, or into the viewing galleries? Cool. Of all you people, have you also taken the opportunity to lobby an MP, filling out the green card?
1, 2.
There are massive changes happening in Britain at the moment, and even the enlightened, half of us, have gone down. I've personally been there, and I've seen amazing things. People in Britain are generally scared of Parliament. They're so reverent of it. It's bullshit. The first thing we need to do before we can fix anything to do with businesses' interactions with Britain is fix the governance of Britain. There are too many millionaires in the Houses of Commons. Not many commoners are millionaires, I know of. But that's not the biggest problem. People's fear of the institution itself is, in my mind, the biggest problem. People need to go to Parliament and see somebody having words with an MP, like I did, or I have many times. I've been in the houses, in the lobby, and seen an MP turning away from someone speaking to them, and them going, "Excuse me, I'm not finished yet," and the police turning the guy around, forcing him to come back and speak to the person that lobbied them. I've seen somebody calling out the Speaker of the House in session and telling him, "Oi, your job is supposed to do this," and sending him back in with his helmet on. People need to lose fear of Parliament and realise that these guys are civil servants. We're the civil, they're the servants. They carry out our jobs, our desires, our needs. They represent us. And to that end, all kinds of business lobbying needs to stop. Any kind of lobbying by businesses should be declared illegal. It's detracting away from what the public want. If the businesses want to lobby people, they should come to us and lobby us. Then we speak to our MPs.
Okay. So I don't know the name. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to pick up on the point that Karina raised as this tension between corporate power and the power of democracy. Because I see this day in, day out, sort of working alongside people involved with community activism. And what we see on the one hand is the invasion and the taking over of the Sercos and the G4Ss in community activity and community services. And as a result of the withdrawal of the state and the closing down of our community protections and entitlements, we see an increasing level of self-reliance. So what we've got there, and it's a sort of question for, it's a request for advice really, is we know that we have to warn about the power of G4S and Serco taking over our community spaces and community and services. But what do we say to people who are, as a defensive action, taking over their libraries, looking after themselves and their neighbours? Do we say, the seeds of another form of privatisation is going to happen through self-reliance and that sort of democratic reaction? So we're really sort of caught here. Who's the enemy here? Is it ourselves as a defensive reaction, or is it the corporate G4Ss? Because it gets, on the ground, it gets really, really complicated to know, how to say, go for that, resist that. So it's advice really I'm looking for.
Thank you. I think Sylvia and Bruce and Steve. Were you first?
I'm not sure if I was supposed to. I don't have to go first anyway. I mean, other people can go before me.
Okay, you go, Steve. And then,
right, okay. I actually think there's a great clue to the problem and to the solution in language. I think when we unpack, when we disentangle, when we see through the obfuscation of language, I think there is a serious solution suggested. I'll give you an idea of what I mean. State and establishment, for example, both come from the same Latin word, sto, I stand. Something which stands is secure, is stable, is established. When something is not secure, it's not established. It becomes disestablished, or it becomes unstable. State, the word state means it's secure. It's not on quicksand. It stands safely on solid ground. Just two or three words to actually give an idea of how language actually is a serious pointer. Parliament. You probably know your French, parler, to speak. And Parliament was a meeting. It was intended from medieval French to be a meeting of speaking between people to actually represent, if you like, the people, or represent the state. And what is speaking? Speaking between people is about communication. It's about finding accord rather than discord. It's about maintaining accord rather than discord. Community is about what is commonly shared, what is common, what is yours is mine. It's about, the word common actually comes from the word from the Latin for munificence, which is bounty, which is about the resources which are actually should be commonly shared. Company and corporation, actually, company is about the sharing of the bread round the meal table, and when one shares bread, and it comes from the actual Eucharist actually, when one shares a meal round the table, everybody is included in the room at the feast. Corporation is about the body, everybody is part of this body. So what I'm trying to, if you like, convey is an idea that the language that is used, that has been used by the establishment, is a language about that actually tries to imply that there is a unifying vision. And actually, of course, unfortunately, that is not the case. There is actually not a unifying vision. There is very much a disunifying vision. And actually, in other words, what is going on here is the language that is used is a decoy, is an actual decoy in the opposite direction from the truth. And what we have to do, we have to start to use language, and we have to explain things. Like if we're going to use a term like neoliberalism, we have to unpack it. We have to actually take it back, for example, to the word liberalism, because before it was actually prefixed with the neo. Right, and explain what the idea of liberty is, and why politicians, for example, Palmerston 19th century politicians actually, if you like, usurped the term liberalism for their own ends in the name of free trade, which wasn't at all free. So really, there's no point at all us using language if we don't convey it in a way which people understand. Thank you.
Okay, Sylvia?
I think one of the problems we're facing with the present system, neoliberal system, is that it has been very successful at producing great complexity. It's a system that is difficult to understand. It has different laws, different corporate forms, different, the issue of personhood that corporations have achieved in many legal systems, that we treat a corporation as if it was a person. It has human rights like a person. All these issues of complexity have made the image of how you change the system. Do you start with a political change? Do you start on the economic change? Very difficult. We talked about, I think I agree that the media corporations are part of the problem, but I come from South America and I have personal experience on how these media corporations that represent the corporations are not just incompatible with democracy, they are the active instruments of destroying democracy. And they have managed already in Honduras and Paraguay, and the war of the media against this alternative of people trying timidly to find alternative systems to the neoliberal thing, like in Venezuela, in Bolivia, in Ecuador, in Argentina. The media is the war, is the regime change. They're not sending their tanks and invading, and no, it's the media what is actually working actively in regime change. So these corporations, they have very different uses. They're not a monolithic type of organization. They are now getting into the NGOs and environmental groups. It's the corporations that, you have to go and find funding for your activities with the corporations, and they have a nicer image if they fund something interesting. Some ethical banks are appearing. That's great, but they are banks, and not all of them are really kind of that well-meaning. So this complexity makes me feel that unless we look at things more structurally and look for political, educational, macroeconomics, macroeconomics, microeconomics, end of speculation, tax havens, and the industrial military complex, and I'm sure there are many more things that they need to be done all at the same time. We need to set up education for a different democratic system. At present, kids are being fed there is no alternative. This is the only system there is. When you grow up, you just go and work for a bank or for a big corporation because there are very few options. And I think the options are appearing. They're the BRICS, the alternative to International Monetary Fund is arising, the commoning, the cooperatives, the John Lewis type participation in the profits of the, there are many examples of different economic forms that are arising. It's just that the media are not, it's not very interested in talking about it. So it's up to us to make these lists and to tell people, look, all this exists and is happening.
Thank you. Chris?
Yeah, I'm sure, as with all of us, that the whole sort of welter of thoughts going round in our minds about the complexity of the situation facing us on our little planet. And everything that's happening, and there are just over 7,000 million of us on Earth at the moment, and these kind of conversations are being repeated, slightly different emphasis or whatever, and shades of content in different locations around the Earth. Never think that we are just a little isolated group. It is a movement of consciousness and awareness that is coming into being, however difficultly, however fragmentedly, however hesitantly. We are in an interim period. Everything takes place in an overall perspective. And if we get that perspective accurate, then we can present an accurate, imaginative picture of hope and dreams and vision for the future for every child, every woman, every man on the face of this dear, beloved planet which we share as our home.
Very nice.
There is a perspective. John Beddington, Sir John Beddington, sorry, the outgoing chief scientific advisor to the government, a level-headed man, not a raving progressive or whatever, but in his speech, recent speech on leaving, he was wise enough to say, we are headed for a perfect storm of food, of energy, of water, of land, of resources, of population, resources by 2030. I'd say before, but who knows. The corporations seek to totally ignore that accurate perspective, and they prefer the illusion of a 19th century imperialist attitude to resources and population and control and domination and exploitation. It's a dead end. They're heading for a brick wall. Maybe they don't know it, maybe they do, but they're keeping up the pretense as far as they possibly can. And, the kind of delusions and propaganda wars that we see throughout the media. Our task, in imaginative terms, in political terms, in social terms, in personal terms, cultural, ecological, spiritual, faith, whatever, is to present a new vision of the Earth in which we all can share. But it is going to be a tough struggle through this interim period. And the real task is discerning the practical initiatives. As our friend here said, there are so many people under pressure from all this crap that's going on through scapegoating the most vulnerable and poorest and deprived in our community. and that the squashing of legal aid and everything else, it is abominable in the worst sense of that word. But through that, we have got to maintain and develop our strength, perseverance through that struggle. I think I've probably said enough. Keep going.
Well, I mean, maybe to say it's, the discussion has been fascinating and there's lots of new ideas on sort of there were just a few things that I felt were questions to me that I hadn't had time to address. So there's this thing about the company or the corporation, and also about the sort of where the disease is, where the symptom is, where the sort of remedy is, and to me they sort of interlink. So I'll try and answer them together. So in terms of so in terms of the company or the corporation, I mean principally it's a matter of scale, and obviously the corner shop does not reap the damage that Royal Shell does or whatever. So in terms of sort of setting out priorities or naming the problem, then it is in terms of scale and power and weight, and in terms then of the sort of principle behind it, then for me it's the profit motive, which I guess comes into the corner shop, but it's such a lesser extent that it's negligible. But to me it's the idea of this money and having to create more money in order to exchange goods and services, which means that the goods and services are unequally divided, and there is this sort of enormous disparity of wealth and power. So I hope that addresses that. But generally I've been very pleased to come here and very pleased to hear your opinions. It's been really, really, really fascinating.
Sorry, yes, you all know each other, but I'm Martin, and I'm from an organisation called Ordinary People, and you're touching on my specialist subject. I've spent the last 5 years working on a redefining democracy, or a new definition of democracy, which imaginatively is called the new model democracy. And there are three elements we're working on together. But I could dominate the conversation for an hour talking about this, but I'll just throw a few things out relative to what people have raised. I think the central issue is to separate capital from politics. We boiled it down to kind of its essentials of how you start to look at a remedy. You have to look at a structure, a system. The problem is the system, and how to redefine, how to redesign, how to re-engineer the system to keep capital away from politics. And we have a solution, which we're about to propose, but we haven't done yet. If you want to look, there's a website. If you look at ordinarypeople.org.uk, you'll find an outline for those three different programs, which is the new model democracy, the new model economy, and new model social security. One of the things that I think, and I can't remember who raised it, but one of the things that the new model economy proposes is recapitalizing people and creating new currencies, which acts as a sort of form of barrier between the power of corporations and ordinary people. Those currencies are regional. There are things like negative interest currencies involved in the model. Negative interest currencies deflate, they create economic activity. There are things like an extension of time banks onto a national larger scale. Time banks fail because generally there's not enough things to spend your hours on. But if you do it on a much bigger scale, you can start to put a value to people's time, so that lots of solutions. As I said, I could talk for a very long time. But there really is only one way to change the system when you actually sit and look at it. The only legitimate means that the system allows to change it is through elections. So the key really is for people to organise in a different way, to compete in elections, and to beat the political elite in its own game. And once that's achieved, then it's possible to resolve all these conflicts. But there really isn't any, well, apart from revolution, there really isn't any other obvious solution. I don't think what else people raised that I thought needed answering. Your point about Parliament is a good one, but I've been to Parliament. I know a few MPs, but they're ex-MPs because they couldn't bear it any longer. I've got mates in Clyde, for example, Adam Price, who did 2 terms and then just gave up because he just couldn't stand it. For anybody with integrity, it's a crushing system. The free bars, the free booze, the people who open doors for them. I mean, Adam was never corrupted by it. He could walk around going, look, they do this. Look, they do this very loudly. Let's go and have a virtually free tea in the bar downstairs. But there's a weakness there, and I think that I recognise what the talk you've given this evening. I think a year ago I wouldn't have raised much of a kind of argument with your summary, but I think the ground shifted a lot. I think the ground shifted a lot in the last 18 months, year perhaps. And I think, from what we can see, all the indicators suggest that representative democracy is in terminal decline. And you can see that in the willingness of people to participate. And we were talking earlier, if you look at the participation in local elections last year, the average turnout was 22.5%. That's excluding the police and crime commissioner elections, where the turnout was, of course, 15%. And although it wasn't reported in the media, our interpretation of that is really that it was people, that's probably my phone ring, people actively didn't vote. It wasn't a matter of people didn't understand what the issues were. People made a point of not playing the game. That's one. There are a lot of other indicators, and again, I don't want to go on too long. But also, if you look in a wider context, if you look at sorry, it'll stop in a second. The 5-star movement in Italy, it shows that people are not. There is an answer. There we go. The 5-star movement in Italy is interesting, Beppe Grillo, where people have rejected politics. I mean, it's virtually a revolution. And the fact that Italy doesn't have a government and won't have a government for quite some time is intriguing. And that's because people have had enough. I think whoever was talking about the fact that people can see through it, I think people increasingly can see through it. I think that the eulogies for Thatcher yesterday, or whenever it was, I think they now completely misjudge the reaction in the country. I think people are not prepared to play the game anymore. And I think that's going to start to show. And I think it really is a matter of presenting an alternative and organising to implement it.
Thank you. I know Dave and Mike, you really want to say something, but I think we'll have to save that for the social, if we can stay around for a bit of a break, because it's coming up to 9 o'clock now. So, and we do have the room only until 9. So I want to finish on time, keeping with the pub. It's been a really nice venue here. Thank you very much for coming. I've certainly enjoyed it. We've had some stimulating conversation. Our next conversation, we're aiming to have these monthly, and the next one will be on the 15th of May in the same place on a Wednesday, and the theme will be NHS and democracy. And we've got Dr. Louise Ivan, who's been leading the Lewisham campaign. Very, very successful campaign, so I think it'll be very good. But I'd just like to end by saying a big thanks to Becca. And a book about democracy from Joe Wilson. So thank you very much. Thank you for coming.
Yeah. Thank you. Sorry, something about Chile. There were student protests there. Apparently they were using water cannons and that tear agent. Okay, wow, happened about 2 hours ago.
Chile.
In Chile, yeah. Huh? It's a right-wing government. Okay, thanks, Royce. I'll check it out when I get back. Well, probably tomorrow morning when I can get into buy a computer. Anyway. No? Oh, sorry. Can you tell me what can you tell me about Chile?
Well, Chile is still living on the plan signed by Margaret Thatcher and Hayek.
I see.
Economics, for the economic revolution.
New Chicago School of Economics.
Both the center-left and the right have stuck to the same model.
I see.
There hasn't been like in other countries in Latin America, so it's full
Oops.
So a pound or two, if you can afford it, will be really appreciated.
In this hat. In the hat.
In the hat. Okay, thanks, thanks, Bryce.
Just a whip round.
Okay. Oh, thanks. I think I should be able to get that when I get back, because I'm not sure with Bambuzo I'd be able to get it. You know, it would actually remain in the feeds, but with Ustream it seems to disappear. But I'll make a point to actually do it. Oh, it won't. Damn it. That's the annoying part about Ustream. Bambuzo it allows it, but what's Twitter? Twitter would be. I'll put it down. Oh, if you tweet to, oh yeah, I'll show it to you. Tweet. Wait now. That's it. That's the Twitter, please. Yeah, that's my Twitter, and I'll be able to send it off to everybody. Thank you, Rice. Anyway. Thank you so much. Okay, guys, thanks for watching this. Not sure how many people will be watching the whole. Well, I think it's about an hour and a half. But yeah, it is interesting. I will be. Unfortunately it's very dark in here, so I'm not sure about whether people will be able to see it or not. I'll see about uploading it. Well, sharing it to YouTube, and hopefully it'll improve the picture, the video. But other than that, nothing else. Okay, thank you, Rice, again, and thank you everyone for joining us. Hopefully, I'll see about sending this off to YouTube and then getting more views and more information for people. Thank you. So peace out, and yeah, have a nice evening. I'll be able to go get some drinks now. Okay, bye.